A freezing prison camp in Germany. 200 women. One terrifying order. "Sleep without your clothes tonight." The American sergeant said these words and walked away. No smile, no explanation, just 5 words that stopped every heart in that room. Outside, soldiers were unloading strange equipment. Metal drums, rubber hoses, tanks filled with chemicals. They sealed the windows, they blocked the doors, they put on gas masks. Inside, 200 German women were shaking, not from cold, from pure terror. They knew what was coming. Their officers had warned them. American soldiers were monsters. They would drink alcohol, lose control, and do unspeakable things. Some women reached for hidden pills in their collars. Cyanide, a quick death, better than what they expected. But what happened next? Nobody could have predicted it. These women were about to discover something that would shatter every lie they ever believed. Something that would make them cry, but not from pain. Something that would change their lives forever. What did the Americans actually do that night? Why did they order women to undress? And why did many of these German women end up living in America and Britain for the rest of their lives? The answer is not what you think. If you love real stories from history that most people never heard, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the bell so you never miss our next story. And please give this video a like, it helps us bring more hidden stories like this to you. Now let us go back to that freezing night in January 1946. Back to those terrified women, back to the moment everything changed. The barracks smelled of sweat, fear, and wood, rotting from months of winter damp. 200 German women stood frozen in place. Sergeant Patterson had just spoken 5 words that stopped their hearts. "Sleep without your clothes tonight." Ingrid, 25, a radio operator captured just 8 days ago, felt her legs go weak. Her mind raced back to the warnings. Her commanding officer had been clear. When the enemy gives strange orders at night, it is never kindness. It is always the beginning of something terrible. She was not alone in her fear. Every woman in that barracks had heard the same stories. American soldiers were savages. They would drink alcohol, lose control, and do unspeakable things to German women. The propaganda films had shown it. The officers had confirmed it. Now, the moment had arrived. Patterson's face showed nothing. No smile, no cruelty, no emotion at all. He simply gave the order and walked out into the freezing January night. The temperature outside was below 0. Inside, it was barely warmer. The women could see their own breath. Erica, 19, a former auxiliary worker, grabbed Annaliese's arm. "They will defile us," she whispered. Her voice shook with terror. Annaliese, 33, was an interpreter. She had translated the sergeant's words for those who did not understand English. Now she wished she hadn't. Through the dirty windows, they watched American soldiers unloading equipment from trucks, metal drums, rubber hoses, large tanks with pressure gauges. The machinery looked industrial, systematic, cold. Lotta, 23, a factory worker, felt her stomach turn. "It looks like the chambers," she said quietly. Everyone knew what she meant. Stories from the Eastern Front had described similar equipment, sealed rooms, chemical fog, bodies carried out in silence. Were the Americans building the same thing here? The statistics of their situation were grim. Of the 200 women in this camp, 73 had been given small pills before capture. Cyanide, quick and painless, an honorable exit, their officers had called it. 2 women had already used theirs during the first days of captivity. They had chosen death over the unknown. Now, many others were reaching for those hidden pills, checking their collar linings, their sleeve hems, the secret pockets sewn into their underwear. Tonight might be the night to use them. Johanna, 29, a former school teacher, had no pill. The Americans had found hers during the intake search. They had called it suicide contraband and taken it away. She had cursed them then. Now she cursed herself for not hiding it better. "I would rather die standing than live on my knees," Marlene, 27, said firmly. She was a surgical nurse. She had seen death many times on the Eastern Front. She was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of what might come before. Some women began writing letters, final words to mothers, fathers, husbands, children, letters that might never be sent. Others prayed silently. A few simply stared at nothing, their minds already accepting the end. The American soldiers outside worked with quiet efficiency. They sealed the windows with rubber strips. They connected hoses to the metal tanks. They wore heavy gloves and carried equipment that hissed with pressure. Private Cooper, 24, from Ohio, checked the gauges on the main tank. He did not look at the barracks. He did not look at the women watching him through the glass. He simply did his job, step by step, preparing for something the women could not understand. "Why are they sealing us in?" Ingrid asked no one in particular. The answer seemed obvious. Sealed room, chemical tanks, hoses, pumping something inside. The pattern matched every horror story they had been told. The irony was cruel. These women had survived the war. They had survived the bombing, the hunger, the collapse of everything they knew. Now, in a camp run by the victors, they believed their final moments had come. But outside, the American soldiers were not preparing for murder. They were preparing for something else entirely. Something that would soon turn fear into confusion, and confusion into shame. The hissing grew louder. The hissing turned into a roar. Steam began pouring through the vents, thick, white, and hot. The barracks filled with fog within minutes. The women could barely see each other. Ingrid pressed herself against the wall. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. The gas. The end. She reached for the small pill hidden in her collar lining. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. But then something strange happened. The steam was warm, not burning, not choking, just warm. For the first time in weeks, Ingrid felt heat spreading through her frozen body. Her muscles, tight from constant cold, began to relax against her will. "It doesn't smell like poison," Marlene whispered. Her nurse's training was kicking in. She had treated gas attack victims on the Eastern Front. She knew what chemical weapons smelled like. This was different, sharp, acidic, almost medicinal. DDT. The word floated into her mind like a memory from a medical textbook. This was insecticide, not poison gas. The Americans were fumigating the barracks. Annalisa pressed her face against the moisture-covered window. What she saw made no sense. Outside, the American soldiers were stripping off their own uniforms, their heavy coats, their shirts, their pants. Everything was being thrown into the metal drums for the same treatment. "Why would they delouse themselves?" she asked out loud. The question hung in the steamy air. Private Cooper stood shivering in his undershirt. The January wind cut through him like knives, but he kept working, feeding clothes into the drums, checking the pressure gauges, making sure the system was running properly. His lips were turning blue from the cold. Sergeant Patterson supervised everything. He too had stripped down, a man of authority, standing half naked in freezing temperatures, destroying his own possessions to kill insects. This was not the behavior of rapists preparing for assault. Inside, Lotta began to understand. She looked down at her own uniform. She had worn it for 6 months straight, never washed, never changed. The fabric was stiff with dirt, sweat, and something else. Something alive. Then she saw them. Hundreds of them, falling from the wooden ceiling, dropping from the walls, crawling out of the seams of her clothes, dead, dying. The steam and chemicals were killing them by the thousands. The floor turned dark with tiny bodies. An entire empire of parasites was being destroyed before their eyes. "We were infested," Erica said, her voice hollow with shock. She had blamed the constant itching on nerves, the weakness on hunger, the fevers on cold. It was none of those things. It was lice, feeding on her blood, breeding in her clothes, slowly killing her. The medical reality was terrifying. Over 90% of the female prisoners were infested with body lice. These insects carried typhus bacteria. Typhus had a 20% mortality rate. The incubation period was 14 days. By the time the first symptoms appeared, an epidemic was already unstoppable. The Americans weren't attacking them. They were saving them from a plague they didn't even know they carried. Johanna scratched the red welts on her arms. She had thought they were from the cold. They were bite marks, hundreds of them, each one a potential death sentence. The steam temperature climbed to 35 degrees Celsius. Bodies that had forgotten warmth now remembered it. Fear struggled against physical relief. The women were still afraid, but they were also thawing. Their rigid muscles softened, their chattering teeth stopped. Dr. Harrison, 42, an American medical officer, appeared at the sealed window. He held up large photographs for the women to see. Magnified images of lice, diagrams showing how typhus spread, charts showing mortality rates. He wanted them to understand. This wasn't punishment, this wasn't cruelty. It was a desperate race against an invisible killer. Marlene translated the medical information for the others. 3 men died in the main camp yesterday. Dozens more are critical. Typhus is spreading. We were next. The 7-hour procedure continued. Steam, chemicals, heat. The barracks became a giant oven, cooking the parasites to death. The women who expected assault now stood in confused silence, watching their own clothing kill the things that had been slowly killing them. Outside, American soldiers froze. Inside, German prisoners survived. This wasn't propaganda, this was reality, and it was only the beginning. The dead insects covered the floor like black snow. Ingrid bent down and picked one up between her fingers. A body louse, tiny, flat, harmless in appearance, but she knew better. Her medical training had taught her what this creature could do. One louse carried enough typhus bacteria to kill a healthy soldier in 14 days. The barracks had contained millions of them. Every woman in that room had been a walking incubator for an epidemic. How did we not know? Erica asked, her voice cracking. She was scratching her arm so hard that blood appeared under her fingernails. The red welts covering her skin were not from cold or nerves. They were feeding sites. Hundreds of parasites had been drinking her blood every single night. The answer was simple and terrible. They did know, not the women, but their commanders. The German Military Medical Corps had documented the lice problem for months. Reports were filed, warnings were issued, nothing was done. Annalisa had translated enough military documents to understand the bureaucracy of neglect. Delousing requires resources, she said bitterly. Resources were needed for the fighting men. We were support personnel, expendable. The statistics told the full story. In the final year of the war, German forces lost more personnel to typhus than to Allied bullets on the Eastern Front. The disease spread through cramped barracks, crowded trains, and understaffed hospitals. Medical supplies went to combat units. Everyone else was left to suffer. Lotta remembered the itching that had started 3 months ago. She had blamed it on cheap soap, then on stress, then on the rough wool of her uniform. Her supervisor had told her to stop complaining. Soldiers did not scratch in public. It showed weakness, so she scratched in private, at night, in the dark, while the lice fed and multiplied and prepared her body for disease. The German command had known about the infestation. They had simply chosen not to care. Marlene, the surgical nurse, had seen typhus patients on the Eastern Front. She knew the progression. First came the fever, then the terrible headache, then the rash that spread across the body like fire, finally delirium, organ failure, and death. The mortality rate was 20%. 1 in 5 died. Without treatment, it climbed even higher. 3 of us already have symptoms, she announced quietly. Her eyes moved across the room. Lotta's fever. Johanna's confusion earlier that morning. A 3rd woman in the corner who had collapsed twice during the night. Early stage typhus. Caught just in time. The Americans had saved them with hours to spare. The irony was crushing. For months, these women had been taught that the Americans were monsters. Rapists, murderers, savages without honor or discipline. The propaganda films had shown American soldiers burning villages, executing prisoners, and assaulting women. The message was clear. Death was preferable to capture. Now those same monsters stood outside in freezing temperatures, destroying their own uniforms to kill insects that were killing their enemies. The same monsters had worked through the night to stop an epidemic they did not cause. The same monsters had followed medical protocols that German command had ignored for months. Why? Johanna asked. The question echoed what everyone was thinking. Why would the enemy care more than their own side? Dr. Harrison entered the barracks as the steam cleared. He wore a fresh uniform, having destroyed his previous one in the delousing process. His medical bag was open, and he began checking vital signs immediately. Typhus does not respect borders, he explained through Annalise's translation. If you get sick, my soldiers get sick. If an epidemic starts here, it spreads everywhere. Saving you saves us. It is that simple. Simple mathematics, practical medicine, nothing personal, but it felt personal to Ingrid. She watched the American doctor check Lotta's temperature with genuine concern. He prescribed medication from his own medical supplies. Supplies meant for American soldiers now given to German prisoners. Her own commanders had left her to die from preventable disease. Her enemy had worked through the night to keep her alive. Everything she believed was collapsing. The propaganda had prepared her for assault. It had never prepared her for kindness. Private Cooper appeared at the door. His face was pale from cold, but he carried a tray of steaming cups. Real coffee. The smell filled the barracks like a memory of peacetime. "The worst is over," he said quietly. "Now we rebuild your strength." Ingrid took a cup. Her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, from something far more confusing. Gratitude. Morning light entered through the steam-cleaned windows. The barracks looked different, brighter, almost clean, but the greatest shock was waiting on each woman's cot. Fresh uniforms neatly folded, pressed and mended. Ingrid touched the fabric with trembling fingers. The cotton was soft. No lice, no bloodstains, no 6 months of dirt ground into every fibre. Someone had washed these clothes. Someone had repaired the torn seams. Someone had replaced missing buttons. Someone had spent hours caring for the clothing of their enemies. "This is impossible," Erica whispered. She held up her uniform and found a small tear in the sleeve had been carefully stitched. The thread did not even match perfectly. Someone had tried their best with limited supplies. The women dressed slowly. The sensation of clean fabric against skin was almost painful. They had forgotten what it felt like. Lotta started crying when she put on underwear free of insects. Such a small thing, such a massive dignity restored. Sergeant Patterson entered the barracks with an announcement. "Breakfast will be served in 15 minutes. Full rations. Full rations." The words meant nothing to women who had survived on thin soup and stale bread for months. But when the food arrived, they understood. Real eggs, cooked meat, white bread with butter, coffee made from actual beans, not burned grain or ground acorns. The smell alone was overwhelming. Johanna stared at her plate. "This is more food than I have seen in a year." The statistics behind this abundance were staggering. American military rations provided 4,300 calories per day to each soldier. German civilian rations had dropped to 200 calories. The difference was visible in every plate, every cup, every slice of bread, but it was the chocolate that broke them completely. Each woman found a small bar tucked into her uniform pocket. 2 ounces of British-made chocolate, a fortune in starving Germany, where sugar had disappeared years ago. Some wrappers had handwritten notes. "Stay strong," signed with initials. "You will survive," in careful letters. Private Cooper had spent his personal wages on these gifts. So had other guards. Enemy soldiers buying chocolate for enemy prisoners. The mathematics made no sense. The humanity made even less. Annalisa bit into her chocolate bar and felt tears streaming down her face. The sweetness exploded on her tongue. She had forgotten this taste existed. She had forgotten kindness existed. "How do we process this?" Marlene asked. Her voice was hollow with confusion. "We were prepared for assault. We were ready to die. Instead they give us chocolate." The cognitive collapse was total. Every piece of propaganda, every warning from their commanders, every terrifying story about American brutality, all of it crumbled against the simple reality of a chocolate bar and a handwritten note. Cruelty would have confirmed everything they believed. Cruelty would have been easier to understand. This kindness was devastating because it proved their entire worldview was built on lies. Ingrid watched Private Cooper serve coffee to her fellow prisoners. His hands were still red from the cold. He had frozen outside all night to save women who expected him to assault them. Now he poured their coffee like they were guests, not enemies. "Why do you do this?" she asked him directly. Cooper shrugged. "Because it is right. 4 words. No political speech, no propaganda. Just simple human decency." The Americans produced over 3 billion chocolate ration bars during the war. 3 billion. The number was incomprehensible to women who had seen their country's factories destroyed, their cities bombed, their supply lines shattered. This abundance was not just military power, it was industrial power, economic power, the power to fight a global war and still have chocolate left over for prisoners. Erica, who had carried a cyanide pill 8 days ago, now shared her chocolate with Lotta. The girl who was told to choose death over capture was now choosing life over hatred. The transformation was not instant. Trust does not rebuild overnight. But something had shifted in that barracks, something permanent. Ingrid looked at her medical insignia. She was a trained nurse. The camp had wounded soldiers who needed care. American wounded, German wounded. Not enough medical staff for either. She had skills, they had need. The equation was forming in her mind. Healing knows no flag. 3 days passed. The typhus threat faded. Strength returned to bodies that had forgotten what health felt like. Ingrid made her decision. She walked to the medical tent and spoke directly to Major Cooper, the American officer in charge. "Let me help," she said, pointing to the wounded soldiers arriving on stretchers. "I am a trained nurse." Cooper studied her medical insignia. He looked at his exhausted staff. 12 nurses, 60 wounded soldiers. The mathematics were simple. He did not have enough hands. From captured German records, the Americans knew that 47 women in this camp had medical training. Surgical nurses, trauma specialists, field medics, skills desperately needed in tents, overflowing with bleeding men. "Can you work on American soldiers?" Cooper asked. Ingrid did not hesitate. "Blood is blood. Pain is pain. I took an oath to heal." Marlene volunteered immediately. 3 years on the Eastern Front had made her an expert in battlefield surgery. She had treated wounds that would make most doctors faint. Her hands were steady. Her knowledge was deep. Within 1 hour, 31 women raised their hands. They wanted to help. The debt of chocolate, the gift of survival, the humanity shown to them, all of it demanded repayment through service. Cooper hesitated. Regulations existed. Security concerns were real. Politics complicated everything. But wounded soldiers kept arriving. Young American boys bleeding on stretchers. German prisoners dying from infected wounds. Need overcame doubt. Within 1 week, all 47 medical women were working. They wore American uniforms over their own clothes. Red Cross armbands marked them as medical personnel. The contradiction was visible to everyone. German prisoners saving American lives. Ingrid's first patient was a 19-year-old American private from Ohio. Deep stomach wound, severe infection, the kind of injury she had treated hundreds of times. Her hands moved automatically. Scalpel, forceps, sutures, muscle memory transcended nationality. The young soldier opened his eyes after surgery. He saw a German woman standing over him. Instead of fear, he whispered one word: "Thanks." Erica was too young for full nursing duties, but she could assist. She held instruments, comforted wounded men, and translated when German prisoners needed care. At 19, she had expected death. Now she was helping preserve life. The German nurses worked 16-hour shifts, unpaid beyond their rations, volunteers in every sense. They had something to prove, to the Americans, to themselves, to the world, watching. Then everything changed. A convoy arrived carrying 2,000 German officers captured in the final battles. Among them was a man named Vera, 38 years old, still wearing his insignia, still believing in final victory. Vera entered the medical tent and saw Ingrid treating an American soldier. His face twisted with rage. "Traitor!" he spat. The word cut through the tent like a knife. Every German woman froze. Every American guard tensed. Vera's authority, even as a prisoner, carried weight. Years of conditioning made his voice dangerous. Officers commanded, others obeyed. "After the war, we will settle accounts," Vera promised. His eyes moved across the faces of every woman working there. He was memorizing names, making lists, planning revenge. Colonel Mitchell, the American camp commander, stepped between Vera and the nurses immediately. "Geneva Convention," he stated firmly. "Male and female prisoners must be separated." Within minutes, Vera and all the 2,000 German officers were relocated to a different section. No officer was allowed near the hospital. The enforcement was absolute. The irony was sharp and bitter. American soldiers were protecting German women from German officers. The enemy was keeping them safe from their own military. Ingrid never stopped working during the confrontation. Her hands continued suturing. American blood stopped flowing. German skill healed. The oath she had taken existed before the war, before Vera, before Hitler. Hippocrates came first. Healing came first. Politics came last. Vera's threats echoed in every woman's mind. Someday the war would end. Someday they would return home. Lists would exist. Names would be remembered. But tonight, wounds needed cleaning. Lives needed saving. The future could wait. The present demanded healing. May 1945. The war ended. Germany surrendered. Repatriation began. The women who had survived typhus, propaganda, and their own expectations now faced a new enemy, their families. The letters arrived slowly. Each one carried hope. Each one delivered pain. Anneliese opened her letter first. Her husband of 20 years had written 3 sentences. You lived. You helped the enemy. Do not return. 20 years of marriage destroyed in 3 sentences. She read it 5 times, hoping the words would change. They never did. The statistics were brutal and consistent. 34% of female prisoners were rejected by their families. Parents disowned daughters. Husbands divorced wives. Children were told their mothers died heroically in combat. The lie was easier than the truth. Erica received a letter from her mother. Better dead than dishonored. Her mother believed that survival meant shame, that helping wounded soldiers meant betrayal, that choosing life meant choosing wrong. Erica was 19 years old. She had saved countless lives. She had worked 16-hour shifts in American hospitals. She had proven that healing transcends hatred. Her mother wanted her dead instead. Ingrid's brother declared her officially dead to their neighbors. He told everyone she had fallen in the final battles. A hero's death, clean and simple. Much easier than explaining that his sister was alive, healthy, and living among the enemy. Johanna discovered her husband had remarried. He had assumed she was dead. When he learned she was alive, he did not celebrate. He called her return inconvenient. He had a new wife now, a new life. She was a ghost from a past he wanted to forget. The rejections piled up daily, letter after letter, family after family. Germany did not want its daughters back. Lieutenant Shaw, an American officer, processed immigration papers for those who had nowhere else to go. British hospitals needed nurses. American families offered sponsorship. A future existed for women their homeland had discarded. Marlene signed first. Germany offered shame. Britain offered work. The choice was simple. She left the country that rejected her for the enemy that accepted her. Erica needed a sponsor. At 19, she could not immigrate alone. A Methodist family in Yorkshire agreed to take her. They had lost their own son in the fighting. Their grief became her salvation. Strange mathematics of war. 400 women eventually immigrated to Britain and the Commonwealth. 89 found work in hospitals across the English-speaking world. Their skills, rejected by Germany, were welcomed everywhere else. Some women stayed behind. They faced the hatred. They rebuilt their lives. They proved that survival was not shameful. 20 years passed. Time softened memories. Shame transformed into understanding. Munich, Germany. Ingrid returned wearing something unexpected. British Red Cross insignia. She was 44 now, a medical advisor. She had come to teach German nurses the techniques she learned in British hospitals. The woman Germany rejected was now helping rebuild German healthcare. Private Cooper visited too. Civilian clothes, grey hair. He still brought chocolate, English chocolate bars. 20 years later, the same gesture, the same kindness. Humanity does not expire. The hospital ward held former officers who had once called these women traitors. Now those officers were patients. Cancer, heart disease, the slow collapse of aging bodies. They received care from the same women they had condemned. Vera lay in a hospital bed, dying from cancer. His skeleton hands reached toward Ingrid. "Forgive me," he whispered. The man who had threatened revenge now begged for mercy. Ingrid checked his charts. Professional, thorough. The oath she kept when he demanded betrayal still guided her hands. She held his hand as he died. Traitor, comforting accuser, healer transcending hatred. Erica wrote from Yorkshire, married, a teacher, 3 children. She sent medical supplies to German orphanages, paying forward the chocolate and kindness that saved her life. The clean uniform from that January night now sits in a museum, a symbol of transformation, of dignity preserved, of enemies becoming human. 6 words had terrified them. Sleep without your clothes tonight. What followed was not assault. It was salvation, not cruelty. It was chocolate, not hatred. It was healing. Proof that humanity survives even humanity's worst demands. This story began with terror and ended with transformation.